Why are you running to be the Hennepin County Attorney?
When I retired from the Public Defender's Office, I was trying to think of how I could contribute to the community. And I thought about the fact that I had 22 years of trial experience in a courtroom, and I have taught trial skills, and I've watched how prosecutors have worked. I was Chief Public Defender for 6 years, and that gave me the opportunity to get a lot of management experience of a large law office. But most of all, I'm really passionate about system reform and racial equity, and this seemed to be the best way that I could contribute. And so I spent much of the summer talking to people, because I didn't make the decision in a day. I spent the summer talking to people in the community, asking them what they wanted to see in the next county attorney. And what I heard frequently was that trust in the county attorney's office is either eroded or is non-existent. And so what I want to do is to build trust in the county attorney's office. And the way to do that is to build relationships by being accessible to the community and being transparent and accountable.
What do you think of the job Mike Freeman has done?
You know, I don't want to be critical. I'd rather look forward and talk about what I would do.
So what would you, if elected, what would you come in and do differently?
Yes. Quite a few things, but some of my priorities would be treating kids as kids. In other words, looking at youth from a juvenile or an adolescent brain development perspective. We don't really do that now. There's plenty of research about that and what we can be doing to keep youth from either coming into the system or interrupting that cycle of violence. We need to treat people with substance abuse disorders as it's an illness and a disease, and we need to approach it from a harm reduction perspective. And I think the county attorney needs to be much more a part of accountability in the entire system. That's both with the office or in the office of the county attorney, but also helping the police be accountable. Even the most progressive police chief can't reform departments by him or herself because they don't really see what happens on a day-to-day basis. People sometimes think that there's somebody watching all of the body cam, but the people who actually see the most body cam are public defenders and prosecutors. And what prosecutors need to do is when they see a violation of a policy or constitutional rights, make sure that that officer is aware of it, and also police leadership so that they can do something about that.
Do you have any prosecutorial experience?
Of prosecuting cases?
Yeah.
No. But as I said, I've been a trial lawyer for 22 years. I've defended many, many different types of cases. I actually teach trial skills to prosecutors at Harvard. It's prosecutors and defense lawyers. And I think it's an advantage that I have never been a prosecutor, because sometimes prosecutors tend to approach prosecution from a kind of a narrow perspective, and it's hard to look outside that box. I've watched prosecution for decades. I know how it works. I know how they react, and I can think way outside the box. So I actually think that's a benefit that I haven't been a part of prosecution. I also understand the trauma that both people who come into the system who have been accused, and also the trauma of people who've been victimized or harmed. I've seen all of that, and so I approach this with an understanding of the role that trauma plays with everybody that comes into the system, and how so often the system really does nothing for harmed people or victims to heal, or to allow people who have done the harm to take meaningful accountability.
Some of what you're saying could be perceived as, sounds like you're going to be soft on crime. What would you say to that?
What I would say to that is I strongly believe in restorative practices. I'll give you some data, just some brief data. Our recidivism rates are exceptionally high here, like a third to a half. Restorative practices, even on violent offenses, as an option for people who've been harmed. There's a program in New York that has a recidivism rate of 7%. And frankly, when you talk to people who have been harmed, they want that option. And so I think people need to actually listen to what people who've been harmed want as well, and that they ought to have an option which is a lot better in some respects than sending somebody to prison, which we know is a violent place and we know makes it much more likely that somebody will commit another crime. Having said that, I've certainly represented people in my career that I know need to be separated from the community, but restorative practices need to be an option that somebody who's been harmed wants to take advantage of, and I believe that there would be quite a few people who would. But if you look at the data, it's much more successful than just sending somebody to prison.
What would you say to people who are maybe concerned? They look you up, they see how
Yes.
you left the defender's office.
Mm-hmm.
How do you address those concerns?
Yeah, I'm leaning into those actually. One of the things that the head of public safety in Hennepin County told me when I was chief public defender was that I was to consider myself part of a family and that I was not to talk publicly about the family. And by family, he meant county attorney and judges. And I don't think the people of Hennepin County wanted their chief public defender to consider herself part of a family with judges and prosecutors rather than speaking out about practices and policies that hurt clients and community. And I don't think they want a prosecutor who's part of the family as well. One of the problems with the system is non-transparency. People often say to me, I don't know what the county attorney does. And that's an issue. People should understand what the county attorney does, and I will make that accessible. I worked really hard at that in the Chauvin trial, making legal concepts accessible to people. And that's really important because if people understand what the prosecutor's doing, they can then have an opinion about it. And that's not happening now. So I have a lot of experience of working with people in the county. I know how it works from the inside. And I think what we need is somebody who will speak out about the problems in the system, not to criticize everybody, but we have really large racial disparities and we have been unwilling to address them. And that's something that you need to talk about, you need to own. And when I say you, I mean all departments. That means judges, prosecutors, public defenders. We all need to own what's happened in this system and roll up our sleeves and do better.
Mike Freeman says he will not prosecute people who spit on police officers. If elected, will you prosecute people who spit on police officers?
That's the first I've heard of that, actually. I missed that.
Yeah.
So I don't know the context of that at all.
He basically was like,
As long as it's not in the face.
as long as you don't spit on
Oh.
face or hands, if you, I guess, spit at feet, even though the law says it is a felony, he will not prosecute that. Do you agree with that?
Without knowing anything more than what you've just told me, the way that law was originally designed and why it was designed is so that police officers weren't subject to bodily fluids from which they might catch some disease or illness. That is also a felony charge, and it does make sense to me that if the bodily fluids don't touch the cop or don't hit the cop in the face or something like that, that makes sense. There are lots of laws that are meant to deter, but deterrence really doesn't work when people aren't really thinking about that or unaware of it. And as I said, if the idea was to make that a felony, the idea was because legislators understood that we don't want people spitting in the face of police officers, so that they might be susceptible to catching a disease. But spitting on the ground or something like that really shouldn't be something that's a felony in this state. It can be prosecuted in some other way if need be, but spitting at a cop is a felony. As a public defender, we used to see a lot of cases where there was use of force and the client was also charged with obstruction. But yeah, I mean, you don't certainly want people spitting at cops, but I don't think it's appropriate for a felony if you're not even, it isn't even why the statute was passed anyway.
The Ramsey County attorney, he won't prosecute felonies that arise from the non-moving
Yes.
traffic violations. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that that's a big step forward. I've always thought that we want to disincentivize police officers to do pretext stops because they heavily land on people of color. And we know from data that we pulled from the Minneapolis Police Department when I was at the Public Defender's Office that when police pull black people over and search them, And these are stops for equipment violations and moving violations, that when they search them, they find guns in less than half of 1% of the time. And so what you're getting is not a good use of resources, first of all, so you're not getting that many guns off the street, but you're also really harming relationships with black members of our community. And I also can't imagine what it's like for a black member of the community to be in their car seeing that an officer is approaching them and wondering what that interaction is going to look like. So I think we need to disincentivize police from doing pretext stops, which are actually legal right now. He also banned consent searches. What that means is that if a police officer stops a car and they have a legal basis to search, they can do it. There's nothing stopping them. But often they're doing the pretext stops and they don't have any legal basis, so they ask the person, can we have consent to search your car? And the law says that it has to be a knowing and voluntary waiver. But what I have heard repeatedly from black members of the community is that even if they know they have that right to refuse, they're afraid to. It feels very coercive, and I think it is a very unequal relationship. And so I think those should be banned, which is what John Choi also did. And I would do that as well.